Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Political Agenda with me, PJ Thum. I am wearing a blue batik shirt. I'm sitting around a table with three other people, and we're sitting in front of a map of Southeast Asia. And my pronouns are he, him. And joining me this week, as always, my co-host Sean Francis Han, editor-in-chief of Wake Up Singapore. How are you today, Sean?
I'm great. I'm wearing like the cheapest maroon shirt that I could find at some thrift store somewhere. And yeah, my pronouns are similarly he, him. And joining us today, we have two guests from Activism in Crisis. Would you like to describe what you are wearing and what are the pronouns that you use?
Hi, my name is Min Jie. I use she, her pronouns, and today I'm dressed in a black dress with like a red flower on the left side of it and with a collar.
Hi, I'm Kumar, one of the organizers of Activism in Crisis, and I'm currently wearing a blue batik top, and my pronouns are he, him.
Nice.
I'm delighted someone else is wearing batik. Fantastic. And yesterday, of course, was Hari Batik. In Indonesia, I think they call it Hari Batik Indonesia. But batik for me is more than that. It's not just Indonesian. It's Malayan. It's Southeast Asian, Nusantaran. So I just call it Hari Batik, and I'm very glad you're wearing. Yesterday, Friday, the 2nd of October, Hari Batik. Anyway, Sean, please take us away.
So today we've got two guests from Activism in Crisis. They are looking at talking about, discussing, really analyzing the intersections between labor, the ecology, and right now, COVID-19 in general, right? So, I mean, ecology is something that I've been waiting to get into for a long time. We've interviewed activists from all different walks of life, from all different corners of activism. And this is the first time that we're getting into ecology. So I'm really excited to get started. So Kumar, can I direct the question at you? What is AIC? Can you tell us, a sort of brief summary what you guys are?
Yeah, so like AIC stands for Activism in Crisis, and it is what it is. It's how do we organize ourselves? How do we advocate for social change, for social justice during moments of crisis? Now, the term crisis is interesting because right now, when we say crisis, we mean COVID, we mean climate change, but there are people who have been living in crisis for a very, very long time. It's what we consider everyday life for some of us. It's crisis mode for a lot of people, whether it is because of their identity, whether it's because of their class position. That's a moment of crisis. So Activism in Crisis was opportunistic in a way because we're looking at the language of crisis to mobilize and say like, look, okay, to take stock of what we're doing as activists in different issue areas, questioning certain theories of activism, like pragmatic resistance, right? But also looking back and realizing like this is for us to call this a crisis and for us to say that this is activism in crisis, it's a pretty privileged position. There are people who are just they have to be activists because they have to survive, because that is, if they don't, then they get hurt, their friends get hurt, and that's what Activism in Crisis was about, to like really take stock of what was being done and to recognize like what do we need going forward and what do we need in this moment of crisis, and how do we also include other crises.
So it's a sort of double meaning. You're talking about activism itself being in a state of crisis, but also activism during a state of crisis and the necessity of activism during that crisis. Oh, great. That's really interesting.
So, Min Jie, how did everything sort of get started? How did you guys come up with sort of this idea of doing a conference, getting that discussion going? What was the thought behind that?
Honestly, I was only brought in at the later part of it, so I'm not exactly clear how it started originally. But when I was approached, I think the team, what they told me is that they really wanted to have, bring intersectional perspectives and also exploring the idea of like accessible conference. And I thought that was really interesting and something that is really underexplored in the way that we have structured conferences for a very long time. So that was what was told to me, and like that was a vision that I felt I resonated strongly with it. That's why I went on to it. But I think Kumar has more to say about how it started originally.
Yeah, like actually it's strange because I didn't start it either. Like I was asked to come in later, and I think it was Singapore Climate Rally. Like I think they if I'm not wrong, like I think they were the ones, because I was invited by a representative from there, and they said that actually initially it was supposed to be kind of like APA itu activists. That was kind of like the reference point, but more rooted in climate justice and climate change. And truth be told, I wasn't an environmentalist until AIC. Like I wouldn't confidently say that I am an environmentalist. I don't even know whether I would say that now, but I am more concerned about climate change. I am more educated in how it's interlinked, and I think like it was a great initiative to sort of bring not just climate activists into climate activism, but to bring in labor, right? Because I was more involved with migrant labor issues and student activism in general, and you know there were people who were also involved with activism in issues like mental health and disability and also like gender and queer issues. So I think that I was very drawn to the idea, like how they wanted to center it in that kind of rootedness where there's no point fighting for justice if there's no planet, right? Like there will be a planet, whether it's habitable is another question.
Yeah. So Min Jie, Activism in Crisis did a series of a conference, a series of workshops, programs, talks and things like that took place in August. So can you tell us about the unique circumstances of organizing a conference in these COVID times, over Zoom, on a completely online level? What was that like, and what was the response? How did you think people took it? What do you think they took away?
Yeah, I think before even AIC started, there is a lot of fear within environmental groups, circles, and other friends who are working on other issues that we are just going to go back to normal, right? And we are not going to have the conversations that we need, because COVID has evidently exposed a lot of systemic inequalities that already existed in our society, and but at the same time we see, like the government seems to be just desperate to return to what's normal, right? With the emerging task force coming out and looking at the composition of who is in the emerging task force, right? It's mainly big businesses. You have big oil, you have the aviation industry, etc., and you don't really have a lot of representative in civil society or the NGO sector, even though so many issues were exposed during COVID, and so there was a lot of fear, I think, within these spaces that we are just going to ignore all these issues and just go back to things. And I think that was like the time period of, I guess, what motivated us to want to start this as well. Sorry, what's the...
No, but a Zoom conference, though, that's to me the very interesting thing, because I think some Zoom conferences that I've seen, they've been extremely successful, they've been very engaging, but I think on the whole they do tend to feel a difficulty in connecting. There's just that face-to-face element that's lost. So what was your experience hosting an online conference?
Yeah, that definitely is a very new situation to be in. But I think it surprised me in the kind of interactions that resulted from it. I think partly also because it wasn't just a Zoom conference. We wanted to build community, and we wanted to start this community before the AIC even started. So that's how we created like the Slack channels. We invited people into the space earlier so that we can have connections, and we start building that relationship after which. I think that space has been very helpful in maintaining that kind of interactions.
So maybe could you share with us like one of the most sort of like noteworthy, the most, the one thing that really affected you throughout the conference? Was there like one thing that happened that really made it kind of worth it? Somebody took away something that was an amazing sudden emergence of a new idea or something? Like one noteworthy thing from the conference. Yeah. So
I think personally for me, because I was mostly focused on how to make this accessible conference, one of the things that really, really impacted me was how, as we were centering accessibility in the conference, people were starting to hold us accountable to it. People were, in the feedback form that we passed around, like people would, ask us things, would tell us things like, okay, there was too much jargon in this event. There was, it was going at a pace that I couldn't keep up with, and I really like that. I really love to see that people were holding us accountable to it, and I think because we centered in the first day, people felt that they can and they can voice us out. And I think one of the things that really was like wow to me was one of the feedback that we got, because there were quite a lot of comments about the sign interpreter, right? There were some comments about, oh, they did such a great job, their facial expressions were so expressive. There was one feedback that we got from a disability researcher who mentioned that these kind of comments can be quite harmful, because it kind of, you know, is saying that it's giving the impression that sign interpretation is like in entertainment rather than providing a genuine access needs. And you know, if you are a person without a disability, are you in a position to actually comment on how good the sign interpretation is? And I thought that was that was one of the most like memorable time for me, because I never ever thought of that, and I think that really showed, you know, my ignorance and you know, in some ways my complicity in this ableist culture.
But I have to say, I think I would see that as a massive success, because that's sort of the point there. You know, coming from someone who does some talks and discussions, conferences on academic topics, it's very hard to get people to sort of hold you accountable. There is that sense in which people just come there and they're like, put information in my brain, right? And they're just going to sit there and take it. But to get them to engage and to critique and feel like they have a part in that, I need to take notes from you on how to do that, because I can't seem to get that
I
done.
think actually there's a lesson there also when we think about broader society and politics, because very often we don't hold our own government accountable for certain things, and we say, well, you know, that's actually not important, or it's not even it's not something that we care about, when actually what it is this is a government which doesn't care about those things, and that's why we have learned not to hold them accountable for it, you know, because what's the point? So we don't even think about it. But you know, basic issues of rights, the government, the PAP government doesn't care about those. It doesn't regard Singaporeans as actually having rights, only privileges. And so when they don't respect the rights that we do have, we don't hold them accountable. And then people say, oh, Singaporeans are apathetic, apolitical, when actually the causality could be just as well, you know, the other way around. If a government doesn't respect rights, people over time stop trying to fight for rights because they know that they can't do anything about it, right? And then you can't blame the people for being, for then giving up on that, you know, the most people for giving up on those rights. So I think there's actually a very powerful lesson there. Right? If we think about how do we change the situation in Singapore, how do we actually change our political culture, it can't be one way.
Actually, can I add to that? Because like the culture of accountability was only in my opinion was really possible because there was a lot of effort and labor that went into creating that space to feel people feel comfortable to critique their own friends, to critique people that they love, but also to sort of do that equally as well with people who they don't know and so on. And I think that's something that we can. I mean, it's not to say that we did it well. I think we did. I think it was a good direction. I'm sure there are a lot of other spaces that do this much better than us, or do it in another degree. But it's kind of like that kind of culture that we also need among activists. I think like to hold each other accountable and to sort of discard some language that we have in the current system that is also responsible for our climate crisis. They're very extractive and very it's very extractive, and it's rooted in some sort of need for retribution. Right? Like if you did wrong, like an eye for an eye, so to say. But there isn't this idea of restoration as to like how as a community we can grow and we can heal. So the language is important, right? We're talking about accountability, we're talking about healing, rather than, for example, if somebody says something, I mean, if somebody, you know, does something that's ableist, we don't like ban them from the thing, or we don't like shame them, right? We try to, because we invited people into this space because we trusted them, because we were trying to create this sense of community. There is this idea of restoration, and I think that's kind of where I hope activism can go in terms of circles, so that we don't kill ourselves. Like I think sometimes even among activists we tend to like really have I mean it's really basic standards, right? I mean, don't say things that are sexist, don't misgender people and all that. But sometimes I think people are just, they don't know better sometimes, and I think like we could really afford to have this restorative justice aspect within our own circles, and that's something I took away from AIC. There was a presentation of restorative justice. I found it very enlightening.
You know, I mean, if I can say so, I've been to a lot of conferences in my time, and this was the most accessible, it was the most open, honest, self-aware, self-reflective conference. And what you all are doing is actually modeling a really positive space for civil society, for citizenship, right, for all of us. What you know, when you talk about this openness, what we're seeing, not just in Singapore, but all around the world, is political environments, civil spaces for citizens, which are full of fear of critique, because it's a system which is winner take all, which is very much amplified in systems like Singapore's, where you have the first past the post, and one party gets all the power, and there's only one level of power. So it's really winner take all. And this creates, and of course you have a government which is notoriously thin-skinned and fearful of criticism, and not very self-aware, and especially not self-reflective. So what you're actually doing is not just modeling something for activism, you're modeling something for Singapore as a whole, right? To show that constructive and very positive outcomes can come from a system which is very honest and open and reflective, where people don't have this fear of criticism. Where if I tell, you know, every time someone told me, okay, PJ, you shouldn't say that because it's ableist or something, you know, I took that as an opportunity to learn and be better, not as a criticism of my self-worth. You know, because, and a lot of that was because all of you were doing that, and I learned from all of you. Even though all of you are, you know, 15, 20 years younger, I felt so impressed and amazed by what I was seeing. And people older than me were also picking up on this and learning and adapting their behavior. You know, people in their 60s, and everyone was creating such a constructive environment. So I just want to congratulate all of you, because I think it was a fantastic environment, but also you've really shown that there is a strong, powerful alternative to our political, civil, sort of an arena of discourse, you know, and I hope we as a society can learn from what you've done and improve on it.
So anyway, I want to sort of bring him back to Kumar. So earlier we were talking about your interest in labor rights, migrant workers' rights, and you wanted to get that conversation going, to import their views, their ideas, their perspectives. Were you able to do that in this conference, and what were the manifestations of that?
Yeah, I think so. We tried to, the way we organized each program or module. So it was about 11 or 15 of us, I think, in the organizing team, and there was a smaller team from there that we crafted. Actually, no, first we had the big team, and then we had all these ideas as to like, okay, what do we feel is necessary? What are some modules that we want to do? Modules, programs, I'm going to use that interchangeably. So like modules that we want to do, and then we had a smaller team to really like narrow down on what it could be. We tried to narrow it down to a month-long festival, and what came out of that was then people were organized according to programs, and they decided to field their own speakers, and we had meetings every week to discuss who the speakers are, what our progress was, and the discussion was good because we were consciously aware of like exclusions in the different modules and programs. I mean, some like there was some, I mean, it varies, but I think the good thing is that we brought in a lot of discussion on labor unions. So if I can shout out to Diana Rahim. I mean, her presentation on so the first event which I moderated was called More Than Tweaks: Alternative Visions for Singapore. We wanted to start from there because we want to start from a position of dreaming first, right? Really dreaming about what are our goals, what are our objectives, what are some visions that we can mobilize around. And then at the very end we talk about strategies. So Diana Rahim's one was interesting in that it's counterintuitive. She says that we want a Singapore, a world where the word activist doesn't need to exist, because we are all doing it, right?
Yeah.
We're all involved and so on. And I really resonated with that because also recent literature I've been reading about the idea that there's a difference between activism and organizing and advocacy and all that. And activism tends to suggest, there's this sort of minority elite or a privileged few who are like, just trying to fight for social change because the rest can't, because they're too busy with their daily lives and all that. That's not necessarily true, because there are a lot of people who are activists because they have no choice. But I really hope we can move to a world where we're organizers, right? And we're all organizers, and we're all trying to build collective movements rather than a single or like one or two activists going out and trying to get some sort of change. And in her presentation, she talked a lot about the need to have independent labor unions, and that is something that we don't talk about much in Singapore, about labor unions. So, for example, like even when we talk about inequality, right? It's actually we talk a lot about high SES, low SES, and that's something I think the government has done a good job in, right? They really went in and then they said, okay, inequality between wage labor, between wage workers, right? There's high income earners and low income earners, but we don't talk about interclass inequality. We don't talk about in each company, right? Like how is your investor doing versus how many workers were laid off? We don't have that kind of rhetoric. We don't have that kind of discussion. So those were some things that came up. And in terms of labor, I think one thing I regret, or not regret, but I think one thing we couldn't really do was involve more migrant workers in the conference, and that's not stopping us from organizing more conferences about that. And but migrant labor did come in a lot in conferences about solidarity across borders and so on and so forth. So labor was always there, and I think something to echo something Minche has said in another panel before, like the climate movement has to be the labor movement. Like we can't. Okay, for one, climate movement can only be successful if it has critical mass, and the critical mass is in the working class, is in the workforce. And the other thing is that workers who are in industries that are pollutive, that are really standing in the way of reducing emissions, they're going to feel that you're going after their jobs and whatever. But that's need not be the case. That's why we talk about transitioning. That's why SGCR, I think after AIC has at least two statements so far with SIA workers. The first thing they said was, we stand with workers, right? And now with the recent Jurong Island incident where an Indian national was killed. He died because of toxic gas poisoning. Actually, we don't really know what was it about poisonous gas. And there were 3 other workers that were injured. Jurong Island is super opaque. Nobody knows what really goes on. And that was another thing that came up in Big Oil. But the first thing SGCR did was say, like, we stand in solidarity with workers. And I think other groups as well, like Speak for Climate as well. Like a lot of these, I think we're seeing a climate movement that is becoming more and more labor-centric, more and more labor-focused, and I think that's something to be celebrated.
So I love that sort of theoretical foundation that you have, right? Bringing labor into the discussion about ecology. But I want to ask Min Jie now. There is also a strong focus that AIC has on intersectionality. So what is the benefit, what is the importance of this concept when discussing the ecological movement?
Right. I think it's something that we cannot avoid if you really look at climate justice and what it really means. I think just the basic fact that climate change is going to affect the most marginalized people, is going to exacerbate existing inequalities, that in of itself is already a call that for us to look into intersectionality. I think, on a international, climate. When you look at climate change, I think it's hard for us to just be in Singapore. I think it forces us to look internationally, because it's a global problem. And I think understanding the position of Singapore in this global landscape of how oftentimes we are the one that are contributing to the climate crisis rather than suffering from it, and understanding the accountability that we have to communities overseas, right? For instance, like if you just look at the simple issue of like sand mining, that in of itself already forces us to look at intersectionality, because communities overseas, like farmers and everything, are losing their land because of our thirst for development and our thirst for like this consumerist culture that we want to be in. And even like the local banks in Singapore and how financially we have been such a big contributor to the climate crisis. I think the very international nature of the issue and how oftentimes power is the one that determines who is contributing and who is suffering. There's just I think.
So it's a sort of lens that helps you unpack, who are the people, what are their unique subject positions that makes them either the contributor or the sufferer of that issue. And I think, that's a very, very important thing.
Can I pick up on something that both of you said, and I'm very interested in is, one of the failures of the previous era of socialism was that it was unable to overcome nationalism. And nationalism defined broadly in the sense of it could be intra-state nationalism, like ethnic, linguistic, religious, cultural groups, or states. And what we're seeing today, again, is that, for example, when we talk about labor, right, labor solidarity between working class groups across different language, race, but also in different countries should be a lot stronger. But instead, what we're seeing is that nationalism is trumping that, and people are hostile to workers from other places, even though really those are the same people they should have solidarity with. And I know you had a panel called Solidarity Beyond Borders, and we'll talk about now intersectionality. Were there any key takeaways from this? Any insights as to this conflict between what is fundamentally a nation is a constructed, it's an imaginary thing. It is, in a sort of value neutral sense of the word, irrational. Not to say it's necessarily bad, but it is not rooted in an objective reality, but in rather an imagined and constructed one. How on earth do we overcome this? Any insights from your conference? I'm very curious.
Right. In our conference, I think we had a lot of discussion, I think, that ended up talking about, we talk about nations and all that, right? But then we talked about classes between nations, and there is this regional elite, right? There is a regional class of people who profit from a lot of this pollutive industries, from a lot of land grabs, exploitation, and all that. And I think there was this sense that we need to sort of build better networks regionally to discuss and to center it on labor, because that's ultimately how it's organized. So that was my takeaway from it, and there was this sense that yes, we should do it more often, but it's easier said than done. How do we do it? There's so many. The like you said, right? You accurately pointed out, nationalism is so powerful, and it's a very successful nation building project in Singapore, and it's in the way of any sort of labor movement from coming up, because there is very little solidarity. You're more likely, I think, to get solidarity between low-wage migrant workers and maybe PMET workers in Singapore, but you're not gonna get PMET workers solidarity with each other, migrants and locals. It's not gonna happen. It's not gonna happen yet, because you have certain politicians who love really stoking that xenophobic fire and really missing the point, right? Because at the end of the day, it's not the migrant worker who's taking your job. It's either a foreign investor or a local investor, okay, who is pitting you two different classes together to fight for what is really basic needs, survival, right? And and it's usually a he, and he would be glad, that the migrant worker and the local worker are fighting with each other, and that they are just going to go and kill themselves. It's intra-class warfare, and it's really sad to see that. And I think we need to work on questioning nationalism. We think there's a lot more research that needs to be done on how to dismantle nationalism, and I think then we need to practice solidarity. How do we? And I think in Singapore, I feel among civil society, the left, whatever you want to call it, it's pretty divided here, I think, because there are some, I think they tend to be older, I think, activists who I think are very nativist, who can be very nativist and say that these foreigners shouldn't have these jobs and all that, but that's not the point. you're missing the point. It's almost as if there's a scarcity of jobs, and that these jobs, like it's almost the investor is like not even there, and it's like, where is that in the discussion?
Yeah.
And that is also a subject of how I think the PAP government has so when Teo Yuan's book came out, right, this is what inequality looks like. I felt that the reaction to that by the state was to come out and say, regardless of class, right? Or was it regardless of class? Yeah, regardless of something, right? And it then became high SES versus low SES.
Yeah.
And it just became among wage earners.
Yeah.
It's really trying to keep it in that bubble. And when Chee Soon Juan says in a debate that, I mean, he didn't even say it actually. It was Vivian Balakrishnan who came out to say that, my voters want to know, Dr. Chee, and his voters are in Kuala Bukit Timah, one of the richer, more affluent voting constituencies. My voters want to know, like, what does it cost them to pay for the poor? And I'm just like, do you not realize that for decades, the poor have been paying for a lot of the what the rich has gained, right? Through labor exploitation, through cutting out welfare, through all these things, and he doesn't understand that, and he attacks Chee Soon Juan and says that you're inciting class warfare. I'm like, it's already being waged by an upper class against a lower class. Yeah. So it's just so much. I think like it's really, really hard to answer that question. But I think like it's very easy to be defeatist and say that to build this sort of like class solidarity, working class solidarity, we need to sort of rely on something more than that, right? We need to rely on a common ethnicity or find some label. But I really think we just need to do more work, and we need to figure out how to bring these things together and what we are up against. We need to study the situation better. We need to talk to more people in the working class, find out, because honestly, these frustrations are real, right? I don't think it's productive to go to somebody who is saying that like I lost my job to foreign. I don't think we should displace that. There's a genuine fear. There's a genuine anxiety. But understand that anxiety and find out like where is this anxiety really should be placed.
Yeah.
Is it misplaced? I think that's what we need to do. We need to have those conversations with people on the ground.
Yeah. I mean, one question that I want to ask, on that note is, in my own personal conversations, talking to people and trying to sort of, get different perspectives, right? One of the things that I often end up hearing is that the ecological movement just doesn't strike a lot of people in an emotional and effective way, right? We talk about trans rights, we talk about labor rights. These are very immediate, very visual, very in-your-face problems, right? Whereas, the climate crisis is something that's a little bit more invisible, a little bit more hard to imagine, right? Given the scale and the timeline that it operates on. So how do you bring that to people? How do you sort of transform these ideas and show how they are absolutely critical and relevant for our time?
Directed to me?
Both of you.
Okay. You wanna go?
Yeah.
Because I like how both of you are coming sort of at it from a different perspective. You're coming from that labor perspective, and Min Jie is coming from this more a bit theoretical, organizational level. So I want to hear both perspectives.
Yeah. So before I became involved in the environmental movement, I really struggled with this.
Yeah.
I was more involved in other social issues, and honestly, I really felt very detached from the environmental movement, because what I see primarily is a lot of like lifestyle activism and like changing your everyday habits, and I just feel like, why are we concerned about all these when there are so many other like lives at stake that we need to focus on. And I think is for me personally is really understanding more of like the human rights perspective to the climate crisis that drew me to the movement. And I think one area of like literature that has really helped me to relate to the climate crisis on a emotional level is looking at more like environmental humanities texts and stories and trying to understand how do we comprehend like the sixth mass extinction, right? Like that has been repeatedly said by climate activists, but it's very easy to dismiss it, because we are constantly bombarded by bad news, and we are constantly asked to move at a pace so quickly that we have no time to reflect on it. But I feel like reading all these texts and really like reflecting on how do we relate to such a issue of such immensity, and what is lost when a species goes extinct, right? Is it I don't really think it I think sometimes we think of extinction as the extinction of that final animal, but what is lost is like that whole intergenerational history and work that puts into ensuring this species have lived and thrived, and all this is lost as a result. And I think another part that really helps me to relate to it is just the basic fact that our human history is such a small part of like this whole evolutionary history, and like shouldn't that fact in of itself humble us and try to and call us to work on these issues.
So what's a text? Because you mentioned that texts have been very transformative for you. So if you could recommend one text, like just one text for a person to read to get themselves, a perspective on the climate crisis, what would that one text be?
I have two texts
okay.
that's like really transformative for me. The first is Flightways by Thomas Van Duren. So basically he confronts this question of extinction and how do we relate to it, what is lost, how do we grieve with these animals that goes extinct, what does it mean for human societies as well. Another text is This Changes Everything by Naomi Klein. I think that gives a very, very good perspective on more like the political side of climate change and how different issues intersect with each other, and it's environmental issues are never really just environmental when you look into it. So those are what I recommend.
Kumar, what about you? How do you bring the issue of climate change and make it relevant for people who can't immediately feel its urgency?
Right, I think what needs maybe a bit counterintuitive. We need to go to the people, right? We need to go to the ground and find out what are their anxieties, and because if it is true that it is in our interest to move to reduce emissions and to fight for a just transition, right? Then that should come up in their daily conversations. They should come up in these conversations. So I would say go down, talk to people, right, who are in these industries that are pollutive, or talk to people who are supposedly going to be disproportionately impacted by the climate crisis, right? These are people who currently are on the other end of the inequality spectrum. They don't have enough labor protection, they don't have enough social protections because of various ills in our own society, like homophobia, transphobia, and also just an aversion to the poor, right? It's very anti-poor. So these are the people who, like, the climate change is just like any other crisis, but just worse. In the end, and we see how it affects people at the margins during this crisis and COVID, right? Your people who don't have these protections to begin with are just going to be left defenseless. So, for example, there was a study that came up. I think it was DBS. They published some findings, and they showed that I think it was like among the middle class or something, it was like 10 people generally face a 10% income loss, and during the COVID pandemic. If you look at people in lower income, you're going to have that times 5, times 6, times 7, because they didn't have these protections anyway. They were working day jobs. They don't have savings. They are already in debt. So the idea is just to go down there, talk to them. What is their anxieties, and then sort of like link it to a just transition. And I think it's also it's the way of communicating this and the way of organizing this is dialogue. Right, and it's not so much of like, this is what we propose, this is in your interest, do it, which I think tends to be a lot of activism in Singapore, because it's because we don't, most of us, our day job is not activism. We don't have the time to do that. So we need like a more concerted effort to sort of do this kind of grassroots conversations and really find out and feed that into the advocacy, feed that into the movement. So it's not something that comes out of thin. It just comes out of ivory tower research and so on and so forth.
Can I just add to something? I think another reason that it's maybe quite hard to really get into the issue is because of how invisibilized everything is. The effects of climate change is very much hidden from us in Singapore. And I think perhaps one way that we can go about this is to try to make these invisible things visible. for instance, something that we really wanted to do in the conference is to show the reality of like that indigenous communities have been displaced in Singapore for the sake of development, and that is something that we don't see in our history textbooks at all. We read more about Raffles than about our indigenous history, which is just like I don't really understand why that is.
Don't get me started.
And also the issue of like sand mining and fossil fuel industry that we financially invest in abroad. Like how does that displace communities overseas? And I think the last thing that I would be interested to explore further is having more information about how environmental injustice takes place in Singapore, right? I mean, we were just having a conversation earlier about how we observe that I think there could be a tendency for migrant worker dormitories to be located near factories, and how does that, like the air quality is also different, right? So how does that affect them, and how the people who are living in the area? Is there a certain socio-economic background of people that tend to be located in these areas? So I think I personally haven't really seen much data around this, and I would be interested to explore more.
If I can just pick up on the history, what that reminds me also is, as a historian, reading contemporary writings in the late 60s, early 70s, and the sheer optimism about our future that is present in those writings about how the world's going to get so much better, things, technology is going to transform the world, we'll have flying cars, we're going to solve all these problems. And then I think back to when I grew up, and in the 90s, early 2000s, and there's a kind of consensus, okay, this is it, this is the end of history, this is, we've solved these things, and we're not going to get better or worse per se, but we're just going to continue on in this trend. And then now when I look at what younger people, right, all these writings about younger people in their 20s, people like yourselves, there's a sort of underlying theme of profound exhaustion, pessimism, frustration, the world's getting worse, is it even going to exist? So I think what I want to say, especially to older people who might be listening, is have very serious conversations with your children, your grandchildren, who are going to have to live with this world, and don't dismiss what they say as being, there's all those cliches. Oh, when I was your age, young children, young people today, so spoiled, blah, blah, blah. But actually listen to the cares and concerns that younger people have. Because for younger people, I think there is a genuine sense the world is not going to be here when they get to, retirement age. And that's genuine fear, right? And I think older people need to understand that. New narrative surveys of Singaporeans' concerns found that overwhelmingly older people were concerned with the PAP's politics and transparency and accountability, but also, of course, things like healthcare, CPF, housing, whereas younger people were really, really concerned about the climate crisis. And that generational gap also needs to be bridged. And I think we need to seriously talk to each other, and older people need to really do listen to younger people about this.
Anyway, bouncing off of Mintia's point, right? She brought up the point about our very artificial and poor construction of our national history, privileging the life of Raffles over the indigenous community. I just want to direct
don't
this
get
to...
me started.
I'm going to get PJ started because I'm very, very curious about this. But just maybe a short bit. How has this construction of our history affected our ecological eyes, affected the lens through which we see the ecological crisis?
Okay.
I feel intuitively
I'll
that there's a strong relation,
Yes.
with this privileging the colonialists over the indigenous, right?
Yes.
One, this massive outspreading force of disaster, another one that was very in touch with the land, with the earth, right? So what can you say a few words about what that relation is, how that's kind of corrupted our ecological consciousness?
Well, I think actually the main thing I'd focus on, right, and I mean, I could talk about this for a long, long time, but the main thing is actually the underlying normative value that exploitation is, that produces then economic development is a normative good in and of itself. right? And this then underpins our entire attitude that GDP growth, making more money, becoming more effective, efficient, right? Greater exploitation of the resources around us is a good thing that improves society. That whole idea underpins how our history is presented. And from very simple things like we were a fishing village when Raffles walked up, and today we're a gleaming metropolis. The fundamental idea is it's better to be a gleaming metropolis than a fishing village, without actually unpacking the idea of what are the trade-offs with that being a gleaming metropolis, global city, connected, right? Having all these resources accessible to us by being flown in, shipped in from around the world. All of this is a good thing. And that is why we should be happy with Raffles and why we should be happy with the PAP without ever thinking about the trade-offs. So that to me is the most key thing. The sort of, it's very neoliberal. It's in some ways a sort of Whiggish interpretation of history. It's but fundamentally it's also, I think it was introduced to prop up first the colonial government and then the PAP government and their decisions. And governments, of course, always want to be shown to be having achieved success. But then also it works the other way, where having achieved this, they have to keep arguing that this is how you define success. So defining success in a very specific way that is extractive and exploitative, I think that's, so we really do need to reevaluate that and think about all the trade-offs. Everything has trade-offs, right? And that's not explored in our history at all.
Yeah, I never thought about it sort of that way, that, by making that implicit value judgment about, colonization, modernity, late capitalism is a great thing. That comes at the expense of the environment, that comes at the expense of the poor, and that's just baked into our history and then subsequently baked into our psyche. So
it's the logic, right? It's the logic of capitalism, right? Of colonization, of imperialism that drives our climate crisis, right? It's something that you said before in I think the Civil Society Ground Speaks that really struck me, which is like, we can't rely on these ideas because the logic itself is unsustainable. Right? The fact that you need to have this exploitative relationship with somebody for some sort of so that people mutual like self-interest, everybody's rational self-interest will somehow create this sort of society where the ultimate good is achieved. Has to be questioned. So Naomi Klein says it very well, right? It's human nature didn't kill the climate. It didn't kill the planet. It's capitalism, and we need to question the logic of capitalism and the things that capitalism has dished out in its arsenal, like colonialism, like imperialism. So just near us, right? What's going on in West Papua, right? It's what's going on in Kashmir. So I think in Singapore, because we get a lot of American TV, we tend to really look to the West a lot, and that's something that I got from the conference as well. Like we tend not to look near us, and I think culturally we are more in line with the US than we are with Indonesians, with Malaysia, and Philippines, and all these countries, even India. We look at India right now with so much xenophobia. It's ridiculous. Like, you can see articles about COVID in India, and you can see people bringing up Zika. Like, it's honestly quite gross. I think, but I just wish we could question that logic.
Well, bringing it to sort of the issue of the hour, right? COVID-19 has affected the conference, your conference, in innumerable ways. But of course, it's also changed our human landscape, right? So could you tell us a little bit about some of the core and key damages that COVID-19 has had in interaction with, of course, the climate and the economy? Maybe we could start with you, Kumar.
I think one is that it has, like in any crisis, it has affected the people at the margins way more disproportionately. And we see this in terms of lower income people. You see them losing jobs. We see them losing income, and with that, they're left to. So that's where I think mutual aid. There was a mutual aid network that was set up, and that was quite interesting. So you had people really just stopping to rely on the state, because I think a lot of our social welfare, right, social services and all that really relies on a lot of documentation, a lot of proof, and proving that you're poor is in itself a traumatic process. And doing that and trying to prove deservedness is also difficult, especially when a lot of people in lower income right now are underemployed. They're not unemployed, they're underemployed. And that's a very key difference. While the press, the government is very concerned about unemployment data, they're not talking about underemployment, which is people who are not in full-time work, people who are in gig work, people who are in part-time work, and or they are in some sort of on-call job and so on. And as a result, their employment might not be official. There may not be any contract. So to the state, they are unemployed. Or when it only comes to receiving some sort of financial assistance, they're suddenly like there's no proof that they're employed because they don't take like the employer's letter or an employer won't even give the letter because why would they? What do they owe you?
Yeah.
Right. So, and I think a lot of that's especially the case for a lot of local workers. A lot of them are in the service industry. A lot of them are doing Grab. A lot of them are doing food delivery and all that. And we don't even recognize, gig work is a really, really complicated topic because it's supposed to be seen as work. I mean, call it gig work. We see them as essential workers, but we don't give them employment rights. Like they're not seen as employees. And the other thing is, that's the same logic with foreign domestic workers, right? They're not seen as employees in our Employment Act. So in California, there was a ruling recently to for employees in Uber and all this gig work to be seen as full-time employees. Yeah, you see, in America, where some can say that there are a bit more freedoms than in Singapore, and this was supposed to be a good thing, and indeed it was. And this means that workers will be given more employment rights. They'll be given some sort of benefits and so on. But the thing is, what Uber did in response to that was to threaten a capital strike, which means that they will withdraw their money from California, and this means everybody will be displaced without a job. That's what they can do in Singapore also, right? And that's what foreign investors can do in Singapore. That's why the government always says that we don't want to give too many labor protections, give union rights and all these kind of things, because if we do that, then it's going to drive away foreign investors. Yeah, but that's only the case if you don't allow workers to strike, right? So that's the other. It's that's why it's always class, and so that's the effect of COVID, especially on the lower income. That's what I see.
Minjie, what about you? What do you think are some of the core issues that have been revealed or have come to light because of COVID-19?
Yeah, I think building on what Kumar has said, I think one of the main thing that came to light is how unprepared our systems are to deal with the global crisis. I think during the COVID period, we see a lot more emphasis being placed on like care work, and how and workers, right, and how essential they are to the economy. But I think but then we don't really compensate them in a fair manner, and I think that is really exposed during this COVID period. I think another interesting thing, I think COVID also presents quite a good opportunity for us to reflect on the values that we want our society to be on, as what we were talking about with the all the logics of extractivism and I think right now we do see the airline industry and the fossil fuel industry being very, very affected by it. And the executives aren't the one that's really suffering. The workers are the ones that are suffering because of the economic crisis that is happening with these industries. And so I think it's we have to start talking about the just transition. Like now we have to talk about it like before the climate crisis really forces us to do it, and we have nothing prepared. And I think another part is I think the COVID crisis also showed us that what we have said previously about it's impossible to change our economy, it's impossible to change our way of life. I think the COVID crisis shows that it is possible. We are changing. And I think the same principles of how we are dealing with the COVID crisis to some extent should also be extended to the climate crisis. And lastly, I think we also have to recognize that this is probably not going to be the last pandemic that we are going to experience with the climatic changes. There's a lot of uncertainty as to like what is going to happen, what kind of new diseases are going to release when like our ice cap melt or something. And so I think it's a really good opportunity to start thinking right now on how we can organize a just transition.
Speaking of changes and transitions, right, I want to ask you, what is your theory of change, right? How do you see activism, AIC, and your own activism moving forward? What do you think should be done, could be done, must be done, and how it should be executed?
Yeah,
It's a big question. I mean, don't worry if you need to think about it. Yeah. I mean, it's something that I think all of us are still negotiating, especially in these sort of like very uncertain times, right? And of course, COVID has come and shifted everything up. So things that worked in the past are not going to work anymore, right? But you know, is there a sort of general sense that you have of, you know, what you think activism should or could be to you?
I think, yeah, just, I think it comes down to having conversations and uncomfortable dialogue about what this transition can look like, and what we have to take care of in this transition, and addressing the anxieties that we all have, because it is really scary, right? Like moving to a new world that and moving away from all our old habits and what we are used to. So I think it comes back to starting to have conversations, and especially having conversations with workers in these industries who are now really affected. I think it's a conversation that needs to be had, because on one hand, we need to transition away from this industry, but on the other hand, there's so much of things that we need to do before we can like have this transition. So I think for me, it would be coming down to have that dialogue and conversation about what exactly this transition would look like.
And so that really echoes Kuma's point as well about getting on the ground and speaking to the people most affected, most directly affected. So Kuma, I'm guessing that your theory of change is going to be somewhat similar. Can you share with us sort of what are your ideas about what activism should be?
Yeah. So like yes. I think like talking to the people on the ground and all that has been monopolized. Having these conversations has been monopolized by politicians, and the PAP and the extension of the PAP in different forms, like People's Association, the grassroots, and all that. There isn't really. I don't think it's illegal to talk to people. So I think it's just because it's so much work, right? Where do you start? Does anybody have a plan? There's no reference. So that's something that we need to figure out. And I mean, to quote Malcolm X, right, we're not outnumbered, we're out-organized. What we need to do is to organize. And there is no one, where we cannot wait for a savior politician to come out. I mean, with all due respect to James Lim and Raisa Khan, like I like their campaigns and all that, but they're not going to be the ones who sort of like rescue us from this.
Yeah, because no one can, right?
No
Nobody
one
fill
can.
that
It's
position.
only
And no one should either.
Yes. It's only a movement can, right? And we need to think about movement building, and that is really, really hard to do. But I think in AIC, the conference, we had some ideas on taking stock of where we are and just figuring out, like, it's sort of like doing a literature review, right? You're sort of like, okay, taking stock of like, okay, what is there out there in civil society, and sort of critiquing it, and then going like, okay, so now what, right? That we had a post AIC thing called Talk So Much, Do What Now, kind of thing, and it was a smaller group. PJ, you were there, yeah. So like, I mean, it's a smaller group, and we discussed like some things, and I think the sense is that we need to stop. I mean, not stop, but we need to go beyond just talking about what we're resisting, right? And talk about what we're building, right? So in AIC, the people, I mean, the conferences and all that, I mean, I can just narrow it down to 4 things, right? Ultimately, it's about a just transition. A just transition means that we need to move to halve our global carbon emissions by 2030. That is as per an IPCC report. You have to do that. Otherwise, we are in a point of no return. And we need to prepare for the effects of climate change, rising sea levels and all that. Bangladesh is sinking. China has issues with the Three Gorges Dam. Jakarta is sinking. That's why Indonesia has shifted its capital, right? And so we need to prepare ourselves for that. And the third thing, which is the most important part of a just transition and differentiates itself from other climate movements that, Min Che talked about, it can be very lifestyle, consumerist kind of thing. You need to talk about how about transitioning in a way that benefits and protects the majority and not just the few. And your majority they are workers. Your majority are people at the margins, right? We keep saying minority a lot, but if you look globally, right, your minority, I mean, if you look at, for example, minorities in Singapore, right, like Indians. If you look globally, how many Indians are there? Like, we make up such a huge population. And if you talk about minorities as well, you just look at the diaspora. You look at the diaspora. You look at where people came from and all. It's actually a majority. It's just it's really controlling discourse to sort of continually feed us this rhetoric that we're weak, that we don't have the strength. And the working class even, right? I mean, they can find all kinds of ways to divide us through nationalism, through middle class, high SES, low SES. We need to fight that. We need to remind ourselves what this is, and we need to really organize around that. So I mean, just to sum up, right, when we talk about just transition, some things that we want to build towards AIC, right? One is to have a degrowth economy. So this means decoupling GDP, right, from carbon emissions. Is that correct? Decoupling? I can't remember, yeah. But degrowth basically means not prioritizing GDP anymore, because GDP doesn't necessarily translate to an improve in well-being. And instead, what we want to do is center care and ecology. And the other thing is replacing our retributive justice system with a restorative justice system, right, where we see each other where we use the language of accountability and healing rather than punishment. And the other thing is just really expanding our democracy. So this means people having the ability to advocate for themselves, to fight for themselves in labor unions, having the right to assemble, the right to strike, all these different rights that are supposed to be fundamental to just existing as a human being. And the second thing, and the fourth thing, right, is and the last thing is really increasing our social welfare, right, in terms of social and labor protections, and ensuring that people who are not visible, right, as Minche said, people who are not currently visible, harms that are currently not visible are made visible, right? Trans people should be recognized. Gay marriages should be recognized. We should also recognize it just baffles me that we have 1 million work permit holders in Singapore, but the national disease expert, right, national infectious disease expert or something, I can't remember his name, he actually said in the mainstream media recently that we didn't account for migrant workers in our plans. And that was like, you didn't account for 1 million people? Like, how did that happen? And if you think about it, it makes sense why you would do that, because they're excluded from our national conversations. So we need to do that work of just making people visible and just bringing these voices to the fore. That's ultimately like where my theory of change is.
Can I just add to it? I think what I wanted to add is, as we look towards building this, moving towards a degrowth world where we center care and we center people, I think activism in on itself also have to try to model this principles that we are trying to build within our spaces, right? I think something that a tension that I often feel in these spaces is that, because we are facing so many crises, there's always this sense of urgency and acting from a place of urgency, and I think sometimes we fall into this trap of activism becoming very instrumental, and we no longer take care of each other. We are just more focused on getting to the end goal and giving outputs and seeing each other, valuing each other based on how productive we are, which is very, very harmful to and very contradictory to the world that we are trying to build. And then I think that's where we also need to look at, how do we make activism a regenerative one? How do we make care a collective responsibility? We talk a lot about self-care, but it's not possible to self-care if the community doesn't value care in of itself. And also, I think recognizing that all of us have access needs. We are different. Access needs look different to everyone, and it could be having a disability. It could also be stuff like, I have a midterm tomorrow. I don't have a lot of energy to focus on this meeting. I'm just showing up and listening and being here today. I think it's just normalizing this kind of practices. So in Speak for Climate, what we do in our meetings is, before we start off, we get everyone we check in with everyone and get everyone to share, do you have any access needs today that we should know, and just like normalizing such culture of being open with our vulnerabilities, and if we need help, just ask for it, and if no one has the capacity to help, let's just remodel what path we are going on. And I think another reason why it's so important to take care of like everyone's access needs is so that organizing activism doesn't become an exclusive space where only people with the privilege of time or of leisure or like have a certain education can participate in, right? If we take care of everyone's needs, the space will be much more inclusive. And I think we need to constantly think about and we are accountable to who is not in the room, who is not in the room with us today. Why do we always have to like be the voice for these people? Like, why are they not here? And like just constantly questioning that.
So I just have sort of one last question here, which is, I think, a semi-personal question, right? Which is, in my conversations with people about climate change and the climate crisis, right, one of the things that often comes up is that when people try and live their activism, they try and make sort of conscious everyday choices to go vegan or to choose options or brands which are environmentally sustainable over those that are not, there's often a sense of fatigue or hopelessness in that I'm just buying a shirt, or I'm just not eating meat for, what does my action count? What does it matter in the grand scheme of things? Because, for every beef burger that I don't eat, Foxconn and the big companies are churning out megatons of gas and carbon emissions. What does it matter at all? So that sense of fatigue, I think, tends to be a big stumbling block for many people who are trying to live their activism. What do you think about that? How do you negotiate that?
Yeah, I think like the language of restorative justice helps here. And I think like we need to think about it as harm reduction. So like our individual actions, right? Like, especially consumerist actions, right? I mean, just changing lifestyle, all that. Yes, it doesn't, really translate to some sort of systemic change or whatever, but it's important to also try to reduce harm in whatever way possible. And I would say like one thing that has helped me like ground myself and not feel utterly depressed, like after, just reading the news and just seeing how little progress there is by just getting involved with communities and talking to other people. I realize like there are some relationships that I have where sharing that kind of fatigue can add to more fatigue. But there are other communities where I share that with other people and I feel so energized, where I'm like, I'm not in this alone and I have this sort of care circle. We can all grieve together, right? And we're gonna do something about it after this. And I feel less alone. I feel like I'm not in this by myself. And there's this sense of solidarity. And I think that's really just the beauty of solidarity. Like I think I think solidarity doesn't get enough emphasis. Like it really takes I think it really has a very healing potential, and we need to. That's why I think restorative justice is good, because it gives us that kind of language of talking about harm, healing, and accountability, which are these three concepts are going to be the key concepts we need to like really get us out of the climate crisis and any kind of crisis.
Minxie, what about you? I'm really curious to hear this perspective.
Quite similar to Kumar actually. I think doing it with people and having a community where you can talk about all these difficult emotions together really helped me personally. And I think one way I like to look at this individual action is, in a way, I'm trying to like also reclaim my agency in this world, right? Because it's quite daunting to look at the climate crisis and the way that it's moving and feel like there's nothing you can do. But I mean, within like doing these actions and things that are still within my control, and it's still, in a way, it's very healing for me to be able to live out these values that I'm not seeing right now in the world. I think the idea that the principle for me is like the process of which we get there is as important, even more important than wherever we end up being. And just seeing this as a long-term thing, and we don't have to get it right at the start. Like it's okay to like have a cheat a day or two, it's like, it's fine.
I mean, I'm going to steal that answer. I'm just going to say, I'm going to steal that answer. Reclaiming agency, right? Because, when the fatigue sets in, it's, or when snarky individuals come and make these stupid comments online, like, you talk about ecology, you talk about, oh, don't use plastic straws, but then you see the big factories go and pump gas into the answer should be, well, I'm not gonna take it sitting down, right? It's my agency, it's my body, my life. I get to do what I want with it, and I choose not to take it lying down. Yeah, so I'm gonna steal that answer. That's a really good response.
Can I also ask for our audience, right? If they want to get involved with what you're doing, what should they do? How can they reach out?
Right. I mean, there are a lot of different groups around, and like SGCR is also growing. I don't think they're accepting memberships and whatnot, but what I do
That's
see...
Singapore Climate Rally.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, and what I do see, however, is the growth of book clubs and the growth of like different sort of circles. So I try to start this radical men's circle, like where we talk about gender issues, and it's just all men. But yeah, it's just because I'm so burnt out. Like, I don't have the energy for that. But it's I think you just need to get in touch. I mean, you can get in touch with myself or like anybody in AIC, and they can put you in contact with other sort of like initiatives that are there. It just may not be so visible because people are just really exhausted, and I think people just want to have these communities, these little pods where they can just talk to each other and so on. And I think, I mean the question that you asked, the reason why I paused is because I think we don't yet have this sense of community building in activism and in just the civil society, the left, whatever you want to call it in Singapore. And we need to do that. And and my honest answer to that is that there isn't that created space yet. It's still building. It's sort of like it's very ad hoc, and I think it's going to be. I think it being ad hoc and it being like unregistered and sort of being this sort of unofficial thing is why it's so strong, because it's not beholden to any sort of institutional criteria and whatnot. And so like what I would say is that, I mean, if you need them and just contact people who are in AIC or people who are involved in the Singapore Climate Rally movement. In the younger groups, I think there are a lot of different activities going on, book clubs and all that. So I used to do this thing we cheekily call GRC, group reading community. Yeah, and we just organize book clubs. I think where I got my intervention with climate first was when one of the founders of that space assigned This Changes Everything, yeah, and by Naomi Klein, and that's when I was like, oh, okay, like you can see the intersections and all that. And I started. It was also quite accessible for me. I felt like I was very hard for me to get into the environmental movement because it's so dominated by science. So it's very esoteric, and so I think like GRC is still, I think, very decentralized right now. Like people just organize their own book clubs and whatever. But yeah, you can just contact me. You can probably contact me. Just contact like anyone at AIC, and we'll just find a community.
Is this something you want to? So like what I'm hearing is both a big problem and a big strength of the movement is a lack of institutionalization, and it sounds like there's no bureaucracy, I guess is the word, right? You want something to survive, you need to create a secretariat, a bureaucracy, a self-perpetuating core, and a way of funding it, and a way of being sustainable, and a way of replacing yourselves over time. Sean, we had this conversation where when you came on about sustainability of activism. Is that a goal? Or are you trying to continue to be more decentralized? And if so, how do you navigate that contradiction?
There was a musician who came to Singapore, and there was a band that came to Singapore in the 90s, and there was this whole ban on slam dancing at a time, right? And it was because of supposed violence that broke out and all that. And a lot of people in the punk scene were upset about that because they were just like, how can you take away our culture? And what this musician said, right, was, hey, like they say don't do slam dancing, you dance different, right? Give them another reason to sort of like oppress you, or find another way to sort of cancel whatever you're doing. And I find that very relevant advice for like how different organizations can come up and sustain themselves, which is we need to find different ways. Creativity is really like super important in authoritarian contexts like in Singapore. We need to find ways where it's not easy. It's all legal, right? It's all legal, but the core aims of the organization are not going to be derailed because of whatever legal constrictions there are. So, for example, I think one problem of registering an organization is the IPC status, right? I think it's Institute of Public Charter, I think, and that is where your whatever donations you get are tax deductible, and a lot of organizations need that to have the thing tax deductible so that they can survive as an organization. So people are willing to donate and all that. So one way is to stop, maybe not be a charity organization, or not have to rely on so many of that, sort of decouple some of these things. So for example, like if you look at Home, if you look at Aware, these organizations are trying to do two things, right? They're trying to do advocacy, but also some sort of like charity, and it's very difficult to do both those things. So the way I see organizations going in this direction is, I mean, climate movement, it doesn't really have to be a charity, it doesn't really have to do anything charity related. And I think these things may need to be separated, right? Where you just might want to just focus on advocacy and community building, right? So you stop doing charity and you focus on community building and advocacy. And you don't need to be registered to do that. You can be informally organized. SGCR Singapore Climate Rally is not registered, right? And they're still recognized by the state. What they say still goes into papers. So in what ways is it different from a formal association? And I think that's where I think more movements can go towards. You don't want to be bogged down by that. The thing is that when you have that, you're still going to need to create some sort of bureaucracy, some sort of protocol, because infiltration is real, right? Aware saga that we witnessed, right, where there was this sort of like the threat of a right-wing takeover of Aware. So scary, right? And we need we need to also be creative about how we design these informal organizations, right? And how to do that democratically.
Yeah, well, I mean, with New Narrative, I registered the company in the UK, and then we're headquartered in Kuala Lumpur. I mean, we did try to register here, but the government made, a lot of accusations, wild accusations about us. But you can't say that we're not having an impact on, politics and society in Singapore. At least I hope we are. So I think we also can think about, another theme that we've talked about, cross-border solidarity, right? And that New Narrative is trying to do advocacy across all of Southeast Asia. And that may be another way to be sustainable, right? Don't limit yourself to just one state, but build connections across borders, or start something that is cross-border, and then leverage the different political environments in different states to find the gaps where you can operate most successfully.
Absolutely.
All right. So without further ado, I'm going to thank my two guests, Mintje and Kumar from Activism in Crisis. Thank you so much for coming down and joining us and sharing with us everything that you have for the last hour or so. It's been amazing, and I think I've learned a lot. I mean, I was always interested in ecology. I mean, but I didn't know how to respond, how to think about things, the intersections that come with human rights, with care, with COVID, with labor. So this has been an absolutely fascinating, absolutely enlightening discussion, and thank you so much for coming down.
And thank you very much. Thank you to our guests. Thank you, Sean, for co-hosting, and thank you to all of you for tuning in. And do check out our sister podcast, Southeast Asia Dispatches, for more news, interviews, and commentary from around Southeast Asia. Check out all our stuff on newnarrative.com. And if you like what we do, please do join New Narrative as a member, newnarrative.com/join, or you can donate to New Narrative at newnarrative.com/donate. So thank you very much, everyone, and see you next time.